Hi, everybody. We're just going to give a couple more minutes for people to continue to log on. But we're very glad that everybody is able to join today. We have a fantastic webinar for you today. Again, the title of our webinar is Exploring Digital Startups and the special considerations and guidance for our emerging companies that are trying to focus on this digital space. It's a little bit, different than other companies in the life science or other deep technology areas. Not to say that digital doesn't have very deep technology as well, but we want to really use this time to really help out all of you in the audience that are thinking about doing a new startup company. And it has a digital component, software, an app, an algorithm, and you're trying to develop your technology, you're in the right place. We're going to discuss the unique aspects of the funding and operating and fundraising for digital startups. And we have a great setup for you today. We have a couple of presentations from people at UNC, as well as a fantastic also panelist, Anish Chandak, that is representing one of our UNC startups that has a very successful story as well that we would like to share with you. Hi, Anish.
Hi.
So let me just briefly start by introducing our panelists. So besides Anish, we also have Bob Dieterle, which again, we're very excited. He's our new entrepreneur in residence that focuses on digital health and artificial intelligence and machine learning here at UNC. So he started working with us earlier this year, but he brings to the table over 25 years of experience, in leading all of these digital companies. If you go back in history, he even worked with the first laptop development team at IBM, which is fantastic, that in the 90s. But since then, he's worked with lots of clients in IBM, Lenovo, and he'll tell you a little bit more about this. But he was also CEO of a startup company called Mobile Smith Health. So again, his background in digital health, IT, and business, and all that entails the market strategy, product development is fantastic. So we're very, very happy that he's able to support our startups moving forward. His background, he has, a electrical and computer engineering degree from NC State University, as well as an MBA from the business school at Duke University. So again, he is also very well connected in the ecosystem. Now he's reached the 3 universities, main ones in the region as well. So very happy to have him here. And we also have as an extra panelist, Peter Lau, who brings a wealth of knowledge in intellectual property at our university. He joined as a commercialization officer in 2008. So again, his just historical experience and broad experience in evaluating new technologies is also quite deep. So any questions that you ever have about should I patent my software, he's really your man on campus to really help out with this. He helps in all sorts of areas, evaluating the new technologies, the commercial potential, what to protect, leads licensing efforts if you license your technology. Prior to that, he was also worked for the Center for Technology and Applications at RTI and the Research Triangle Park, as a commercialization manager there. And his background is in mechanical engineering from Vanderbilt University, and he also has an MBA. From the UNC Keenan Flagler Business School. And I briefly mentioned Anish earlier, he is also a software engineer, who received, he's a UNC graduate, he receives a PhD from Chapel Hill, but he also has a computer science background from IIT in Bombay in 2006. And I mentioned he has a really nice story to tell. His startup is called Impulsonic, so he was the co-founder and CEO of this company, which was actually acquired by a company called Valve that you may have heard of, and he's actually now has a role in this company as a software engineer. And he's one of the main developers of Stream Audio and has worked at integrating spatial audio technologies in Counter-Strike, Global Offensive and Half-Life. So again, very, very interesting panel that we have here that we hope will be very useful for everybody on here. So with that, I'm gonna let Bob start with a presentation, telling you a little bit more about, again, commercializing digital startups. Please go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Maria. Let me just see if I can get on screen share here. You see my deck okay?
Yes.
All right, good. I always like to get that validation and get the technology working correctly. Thank you for having me here. Again, my name is Bob Dieterle, and you did a great job introducing me, Maria, so I don't need to talk more about that. I'm excited to be part of UNC. I've been here almost a year now, helping digital-related research that I think is very attractive, helping them through the commercialization process, working very closely with Peter on many initiatives. I kind of wanted to take you through what I'm doing here. But first of all, we say the word digital a lot. And the digital term technology has been around for decades, but now it has a different connotation with mobile and big data and things like that. I like to try to level set everybody how I look at that. Digital is small screens. Everything we do now, pretty much, we are doing through small screens, not just consuming content and entertainment, but, planning vacations, banking, doing your insurance. Think about how that has completely disrupted us in many good ways. So I always look at that, and designing a digital solution for a small screen and optimizing for that is very key and important right now. The others is digital natives. I'm not a digital native. I'm a digital adopter. I know the old ways of doing things. I remember how I used to have a travel agent. I remember how to mail a letter, right? Now with the generations coming up, starting with the millennial generation, specifically a lot of health-related digital research I work with, the millennial generation is coming into the health system now. They're having their first babies, and they expect solutions. They are interacting with technology in completely different ways. Agile methodology, you might have heard that. You might have seen lean methodology for startups. My approach, and I think successful approaches for digital, is thinking big, but then starting small and acting fast. And it's not just the software development philosophy, it's a business philosophy of having a hypothesis about your market, about your product, and then getting it into market and seeing the data that comes back in, successful data as well as unsuccessful data, to continue to validate your value proposition and your business model. The public clouds has completely changed the game in software right now. Amazon, Azure from Microsoft, Google Cloud, there are a lot of small little public clouds now. If you're a digital startup and you're not going to be on one of these public cloud solutions, I'd have a lot of questions on that, because the ecosystem and the services and software and products that they have out of the box really makes it cost efficient and gets you into the market very quickly. Data, big data, especially in health. Data now is driving the workflow. It's easy to consume. It's easy to obtain now. Many different sources is the challenge. How do you get insights from it? Every startup that I look at, I try to have the data question with them: is what data is driving the workflow? How are you bringing it to an end user? Like, what is the right data at the right time to the right person to make the right decision? That's usually a digital solution, especially when you're talking about a workflow. And lastly, this is kind of a little bit more on the emerging side. The 5G implementation is going to completely disrupt technology again. You hear about the automated cars. You're going to have edge of network towers all over the place that's going to be able to process and make decisions very quickly. As you think about it, as you're driving down a road, you're going to need to be feeding data constantly into that car and making split-second decisions. And 5G is going to completely disrupt our technology again, and something that's exciting as we look forward. So you hear the word digital transformation a lot. And when I look at research, or if I'm working with an early stage company, I'm trying to figure out what category are you in. You're either in the digital experience category, creating a experience that your customers are not asking for right now, where you're disrupting a whole industry, or you're automating a workflow, a business workflow through digital technology. So I look in one of those two buckets as we discussed. And then I help with having questions around your digital ecosystem. When I did my health startup, digital startup in 2010, we developed everything out of the box, our software stack. We ended up with like 1 million lines of code. But these days, you don't need that. There's a lot of out-of-box products. And so I help figure out what your core technology is that's really going to implement and differentiate and add value to your emerging startup business. And then the rest you can outsource and get best practice software components out of the box without having to develop them yourself. So there are the 3 areas that I look at as we start talking and kind of working through the process. Now, what I've seen since I've been here at UNC, and Maria, you alluded to it a bit around therapeutics and drug discovery and medical devices. For software, it's a different game. It's not a patent game for your software. Yeah, you could issue a patent, but there's usually pretty much every novel idea has been blocked by the big guys like AT&T or IBM or whoever. You probably won't get the broad patent you think you want. And so that's not really how you protect or bring value to your startup. It's all in the use case. There's so much technology now that is not really novel, but when you apply it to a use case that is maybe an underserved segment of the market, that's the novelty in it. Think of Airbnb. I mean, it was pretty much Expedia and Travelocity. It's just the technology really wasn't novel. It was the use case of actually enabling, someone's to share someone's home. Same thing with Uber. The technology wasn't novel. They didn't have any patents out of the gate. They ended up buying a bunch of patents from AT&T later on once they had a bunch of money. But initially, it was all about the use case and sharing someone's car for a ride. So that's what I look for when I'm working with these early stage companies. And then you're not going to get a lot of funding out of the gate, or you're not going to get a lot of funding on your PowerPoint or your idea early on. Again, when I did my startup 10 years ago, I did because you needed probably $300,000-$400,000 of capital to get a software business going then. Today, you could get going for $30,000 to $50,000 now and get spun out. And VCs know that, investors know that, and they're now waiting for digital startups that have proven out their hypotheses, proven out their business models, gained traction in a segment or market, and generating revenue. There's a couple data points here I like to show. This is recently from PitchBook. The median age now is 3 years in business before an angel round on average. That was 1 year 10 years ago. So it's increased 3 years now. Valuations are higher now, right? 4.2 million on average to get an angel round in 2020 versus what it was in 2015. Your 4.2 million valuation, you probably have $500,000 to $1 million in revenue at that point. And so pretty much you need to bootstrap, and this third bullet, customer fund your business in the digital side, and generating first revenues is really the approach. And I help a lot of these startups with these processes. And then the last one, I view believe this very strongly, that sales and marketing is really part of the IP for the startup. I hear a lot, well, how do we protect our digital startup? If anybody could kind of build what we're doing, if the technology is not novel, well, if you know who to sell to, find the right prospects, learn how to generate leads, qualify those leads, close deals, right? That is a lot of intellectual property that it's going to be tough for people to replicate that might have deep pockets. And so I see a lot of startups that want to outsource their appointment setting and their sales, and I discourage against that and help them get going, because that's a very key part of success. My process, I've talked about this again. It's important as a startup, at least on the digital side, to think big. Think about your market. Think about, you know, what you're trying to disrupt, what doesn't exist today. But once you spin out, you got to be maniacally focused. Start small. Start with an initial market segment. Start with an initial MVP product. And test it, and then make sure you have, if you're the CEO or the founder, make sure you have data that you're reviewing regularly to validate your assumptions and your hypothesis and your business model. And that's where your data comes in many times, that you'll see very successful pivots into adjacent markets or adjacent products. It's very important to get that engine going as you spin out. I pretty much follow kind of three kind of milestones, if you call it, if you look at the columns here. First, I'm kind of proactive here at UNC. I've been very blessed that you guys let me go and engage with the community here. But I kind of doing this kind of venture discovery. First thing I always ask, I really want to understand the problem, not the technology. I want to understand, well, how big is this problem? How pervasive is it? How much pain does a target segment have? And is the technology that you're proposing, is that the best method to solve it? I'm really trying to understand that initially. If you go back down, you'll see that I look at three categories: market, product technology. I actually put product first because it's the packaging of the technology that's very key. And then the business side. Team formation. You see here, I say team building, 3 hats. You hear that all the time. If you're a founder, you need to wear multiple hats, or your team has to have multiple hats as you start up. In digital, I see 3 key ones. You need to have your founding team. You need to possess this, or you need to build a team that does. It's a tech hat, it's a domain expertise hat, and it's a sales hat. They're the 3 hats that I look for, and if the team doesn't have it, we help build that up. They're the 3 ones that are very important as you spin a company out. And then I'm going to talk immediately about what an MVP is in terms of product. And then it's very important, since you're not going to get a bunch of funding to start up, having a cash plan, very detailed cash plan as you start up, and your resource ramp. You're not going to get the luxury of hiring 4 full-time people. You're going to have to fractionally do it. And how you do that and how you ramp that business is very key. Real quick, I want to spend a little bit on minimal viable product. I love this picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Whenever I have an intake to any PI that I work with, I give them this picture, and usually they could figure it out. When you're disrupting and automating a workflow, you don't necessarily need to have the car. Your vision might be the car is the solution one day, but start with the scooter. Because if they're getting from point A to point B and the scooter is going to be a nice big improvement to what they're doing now, it's going to be easy to implement, and it's going to be easier to get feedback. And then you iteratively build on that. You motorize a scooter, then you turn to a bike and a motorcycle, and you do it iteratively like that as data's coming in, as money's coming in and cash is coming in, and you're growing your business. That's the product. And then up top there, what's very key, because I see entrepreneurs that have broad visions, develop the product for the few, make the tough decisions on the features you want to have, and make sure it's the few that you believe as you enter the market are the ones that are going to value your solution the most, the ones that need it the most. Find out who they are, make sure you have the feature set for them, and attack them. Back now on the market, if you looked at my chart earlier, I had the word sprint next to each of the categories, and it got some, that's more of an agile methodology. A sprint is short little tests to validate your hypothesis. As you spin out into the market, you're going to have 3 hypotheses. You're going to have a business model hypothesis, a tech and product hypothesis or value proposition, and you're going to have a market hypothesis. And one way that I look at your market, again, you might be selling to 6,000 hospitals. Well, not on day one. Who are the 500 hospitals, and how do you define them? Who's your ideal customer profile of those hospitals that need that will find the most value out of your offering? And you market and sell to them first. You might get other hospitals there, but your messaging and your campaigns you run You're going to have limited money. You're going to have to be very focused. And that's a methodology that I use and help with. The other thing I talk about is, I love this chart from Chet Holmes. Who's buying now? Not everybody in your target market. So as you're ramping your business up, you need to really get your first sales within your first 6 months to a year. Specifically, if we're talking B2B here, let's say. Well, not everybody in your segment is ready to buy at that given time. Think about us. We're all in the market for cars. We're all a prospect to buy a car, but how many of us are ready to buy a car like right now in the next month? 3%. And another 7% can be influenced to buy now. So maybe 10% of your prospects could buy now. Well, message to them. And you see, that's why you see a lot of car commercials all the time, because they're just trying to grab the people. Oh, Labor Day, Toyotathon, come on in now. That's just trying to get those 10% to buy now. So the approach that I use and help with initial market entry, because a lot of my PIs and venture teams I'm working with ask that question, and this is what we help try to identify. So that's some of the things, a little high-level process that I use to have been utilizing here at UNC. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Maria. I appreciate it, and I'll be here for questions.
Perfect. And then thank you so much for that, Bob. Before we go to the Q&A session, why don't we go ahead with Peter's presentation as well to, again, talk about the process of commercializing digital technologies at UNC.
Great. Sure. So I guess like Bob, can you all see my slides there? Yes? Okay.
All good.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time and talk about our process internally within the Office of Technology Commercialization, the types of things that we think about with regard to digital innovation, and how that process flows into potentially digital startups. So I do manage primarily for the office software and copyright, and from across the university. So normally I sit with computer science. So I had the privilege of working with Anish and Impulsonic as they got launched and exited. But I'm working with other units from the School of Government to the business school to social work and nursing. So kind of all over, and have done stuff with medicine and dentistry. So everybody, I think, is very active in this space and thinking creatively. And we do see a lot of different opportunities popping up in terms of different types of apps. And to some degree, we're kind of learning along with everybody else and trying to work with folks like Bob to make sure that we've got the resources and support to move things forward and in whatever manner that might be. So that'll be some of the focus on my talk is just kind of all the different commercialization pathways that we see. And I think a lot of the factors that are relevant in any of those pathways are certainly relevant to emerging companies and startups. So it's some things you might need to think about foundationally. Just so the different opportunities, you can kind of tell kind of risk reward or challenges, benefits, starting on the left, kind of traditional academic pursuits of publication is one way to get your innovation out there. And then there's all different kinds of licensing or licenses that can happen as you kind of ramp up and add more. In some cases, we'll have some things that are patentable on this side. And I think Anish will probably talk a little bit about what we found on their 3D audio side of things. And oftentimes we do see startup companies, trying to look at all different types of intellectual property, right? Like the know-how that Bob mentioned, but if they have something that's viable on the patent side, I think they'd like to have that in their pocket when they go talk to investors. But certainly all of that comes with more challenges, but I think the expectation is that we'll have more benefits to go along with that as well. Just for attendees or participants that are from inside the university space, why do folks, grad students, faculties participate? So certainly, I think faculty have a goal to see their innovations have the broadest application. Not just have a paper completed or meet some deliverable in their grant, but to see it actually benefit users, customers, patients in whatever form or fashion is appropriate. I think there's benefits certainly to the different stakeholders on campus, from the departments and who share in that upside as well as the university. We also enjoy, being able to tell the exciting stories of folks that have had success or made impact. And then kind of intangibly on the kind of startup side, beyond just kind of, hey, we'd like to make a lot of money off of this, I think there is a sense of control that a lot of people, have invested a lot of time and effort into this, and don't just want to throw it over the fence to some outside company. They'd like to, be involved with this as it emerges and is developed. So there's that sense of that. I think there's also, this opportunity for future students to stay engaged beyond their grad school work, right? So they have also invested a lot of time along with the faculty, and then they're in the position of needing a job. So sometimes startups can help provide that, and you've got somebody with the passion and time and interest to join as a founder. And I think that's one of the key takeaways, is where we can have university digital startups, to have some participant from the UNC side at the founder level that's very engaged has been helpful to move things forward, because there's still a lot of work to do on almost anything that comes out of the university and is going to be commercialized, startup or not. But in particular, I think the startups benefit from having that expertise kind of go with the company. Nuts and bolts for how folks participate with OTC and the rest of the administrative offices at UNC. For any intellectual property that comes up and developed with internal funds or through proposals, grants, sponsored research, there are terms and requirements, obligations as those things are developed. So we need to report to the federal government, for example, or potentially to the sponsor, and then work with any, vendors, collaborators to make sure that we're handling the IPs correctly, so that, when we get further down the road and folks are thinking about commercialization or even a startup, we've got appropriate protections in place and understand kind of what we have and who's been involved. So OTC can help with that, and then identifying, where we want to, focus our efforts to protect things, or to, manage kind of the understanding of that technology. So working with, myself and Bob and Kickstart, we can look at, the different copyrights, patents, trademarks, know-how that could be important, and start to think about how we might package that up in some form or fashion to help move the technology forward. So, obviously the, OSR will help review contract terms in any sort of sponsored work. We have a formal reporting mechanism with OTC where you can report an invention to our office, and kind of lets us know who's involved, what funding, opens a file so that we can all be, tracking things appropriately, and making sure that we've got one place where information resides. So if people change or things evolve over, a period of time, that we're keeping track and staying on top of that. And that's a good way to kind of be, fully engaged. But we're happy to start with informal discussions, email, phone calls, Zoom, to kind of say, what do I have, and where might we go? But that's kind of the formal piece of our process. And then kind of on the commercial side with third parties, as we go, certainly in development, and then as we get into licensing, we're thinking about how there may, research may flow in different directions, what those collaborations look like. Occasionally we have agreements where folks are contributing in kind and maybe funding isn't coming, and that will certainly have an implication on the IP that's developed. Or if you hire a vendor to create an app, or you're building on a platform that's owned by a third party, we'll have to think about that engagement and how that might impact what you want to do. So certainly I would say with all of this, kind of the end goal that you have in mind is really critical in the startup, or even how you would like to structure that startup or be involved. All of that, I think, has a big impact on decisions made along the way. So it's certainly a conversation over time for how we can support these things and make them successful. Echoing a little bit about what Bob, I think, touched on for, what are considerations for digital assets as they come forward. We always want to think about, what's kind of special about this, what makes it different from what's currently out there. Certainly, I think we appreciate that there can be a blend of intellectual property that may be relevant and will help think about what might be important in whatever commercialization pathway is selected or proven to be the best way forward. So we'll think critically about those things. And then kind of intangible things too. Not all of these questions will be answered before we move forward, but there's certainly things that we're thinking about as we go, and certainly places to look at for any kind of red flags and whether or not we might have some issues that need some missing piece, or maybe could be insurmountable. But we'll think about those, and then thinking about outside, from the OTC perspective, most of what we do are commercial licenses with third parties, external. Some of those third parties end up being startups or UNC startups, but we're always thinking about it in kind of a traditional licensing sense. But that's the same process of thinking can be applied to a startup and saying who might be our valuable strategic partners. They may not be the company that UNC licenses to, and then that company goes off and commercializes this, but maybe they're that first customer for a startup, or maybe they bring something, a platform or some enabling piece of technology that can help the startup actually be viable. So I think those conversations have a lot of cross benefit. For folks getting into this area, we have some guidance on our website just generally about copyright, because that's an area where we do get a lot of questions. Certainly if you have questions on the patent side, we can talk a lot about that. I think that tends to be a little bit more streamlined and straightforward on what is patentable, what is not. But there's been a lot, and we have two policies, one a patent invention policy, one copyright policy. And so we've tried to streamline things a little bit there, just even down to how do I mark this for copyright, all the way through to things like ownership. I think we specify the different distribution routes for software and copyright under that. So a lot of times we see folks are just moving institutions and want to take it. But if you want to work with companies to provide them with some sort of demo or evaluation license, even including to startups, we have a student team, I think, that's spinning a technology out, trying to work with a large company to develop it. And I think they'll have an evaluation license. They don't have to jump all the way straight to kind of a full commercial license with financial terms. So we can be flexible and support startups in kind of creative approaches to licensing. And then I think kind of lastly, other considerations for us, we are trying to create a more standardized approach for digital startups, and kind of like create a level playing field like we have with the Carolina Express license. And so those licenses would feature, comparable things. So taking equity, having some royalty tied to net revenue, and try to make them simple and accommodating of kind of what's traditional and kind of software digital market. And, I've done a lot of homework with our peer institutions and other organizations that are active in the software digital startup space, so that we're following best practices for how we structure those. And so that, it's very different how you do a license to a therapeutic, right, or some medicinal chemistry versus software. So we're trying to be flexible in regard to that, and then also trying to recognize all of the different ways that these projects come through the university, taking advantage of different resources, and maybe a little different than the traditional life science technology that might come through. So we are trying to be more active in the digital side, both in terms of resources and support like what Bob offers, but also in how we approach licensing. And that's it for me. I think Maria I can hold questions until the Q&A. Go with that.
Great. So so at this stage, thank you so much for the presentations, both Peter and Bob. So again, we're gonna open up for questions from everybody in the audience. So please feel free to write a question in the chat room. In the meantime, we've prepared a few questions we can start with. And let's start with you, Anish. I'm sure many people here today would like to hear a little bit more about your story. Again, there might be in the same place where you were, you obviously were doing a PhD at UNC at the time. And then tell us more about that personal trajectory and how you started on Impulsonic, maybe how you worked also through the IP and just personally, how did you manage eventually to become a CEO and tell us a little more about the company itself? Thanks.
Sure. One of the things we were doing, just to give a rough sense of what the company we started was about, my PhD research was on how to do acoustics modeling. It has a lot of similarity with computer graphics, for which UNC's computer science department is very well known for. So we apply a lot of computer graphics ideas on how to model sound instead of light. And our goal was to make faster and better algorithms so folks can use it to make better design decisions. So that's the basic technology we were working on when I was doing my PhD. And we would talk to a lot of acoustical consultants who generally use these software. So that was sort of the first part. As you're doing research, having this sense of you talk to a lot of people, that helped a lot in just getting a sense like, is there a need for market? Is there a need for this technology outside? So I think that sort of was the starting point to some extent. And during my PhD, one of the co-chair of the Department of Computer Science, Tim Quigg, at the time, he taught a course, and I think that sort of sparked a lot of interest. The course was something I think Peter teaches as well, about IP, about commercialization. And I think that's when we started thinking, is there any value in creating a startup based on the research we were doing? So from there on, we took a whole bunch of courses at the Keenan-Flagler Business School, and department was highly supportive of like, okay, fine, feel free to like go ahead and take courses. So that's how it all started. And by the time I was about to graduate, because we were thinking of doing startup, we had started applying for funding a year before. So that helped us a lot in the sense that by the time I graduated, we actually had received our first STTR grant. And I think John Nuwari is one of the attendees. He's at SPTDC, and they helped us a lot in like sort of navigating how to apply for STTR grants. So that sort of lined up very, very well personally for me, because it's kind of rare that as soon as you graduate, you have your funding lined up for your startup. So that helped mitigate the risk in some sense, and the decision of, okay, let's just go ahead with the startup made it a little bit easier because we had funding secured. So that, and in the whole process, because I was a student at the time, it was kind of low risk to do a lot of research work and a lot of market research. It seems like most people would be receptive to a student like asking a bunch of questions. So that kind of helped and worked out in some sense. So that was sort of the journey of starting Impulsonic. Yeah.
That's great. And again, I do think for anybody who's a student or early in their research career at UNC to that point, really take advantage of this, because when you're doing customer discovery, companies are a lot more feasible of answering your questions if you're applying with a UNC link, email address, than if you're calling from a company side. They don't see you as a competition quite yet, so take advantage of that.
Yeah. You
also mentioned something interesting, Anish, again, that you were able to apply for this non-dilutive funding, STTR. So open to everybody, Bob and Peter as well, how do you see funding and fundraising strategies for this digital startup companies, when, might, sometimes go on the route that Anish took for STTRs? Is it always, advisable? What are your opinions in terms of fundraising, and Anish, also hearing from you, was that a timeline work for you, or was that time consuming, and did it kind of fit the model that you were trying to get at the time?
I think what was great was it was non-dilutive funding. And one of the challenges that I have seen sort of startups go through when they are coming out of a research mindset, we were like, we have this hammer and let's just figure out what problem we can solve, as opposed to what Bob was saying earlier. Can you tell me what the problem is? Like, as opposed to, I'm not saying it applies generally, but it applied to us where we had a solution. Like we had this great technology, where all can we use it, as opposed to what's the problem you're trying to solve. So I think from that perspective, having some initial non-dilutive funding helped us focus down the line without having wasted a lot of investors' money or your own time in some sense. We took the route of non-dilutive funding where we applied the research to some extent, and in the process did our market discovery to sort of hone which are the markets we need to focus on. So that helped us for sure.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to what Anish was saying. It's one of the reasons I'm enjoying being at UNC. The services and the funding opportunities that are here are very good compared to what I was used to in the private sector. There's, KBS Kickstart Awards, Micro Awards, there's, Carolina Research Venture Fund, there's Carolina Angel Network, Triangle Angel Network. There are a lot of different routes to get potential funding for a digital startup. Now, like I said at the beginning though, typically you're not going to get a lot of upfront money for an idea. And so one of the things I recommend is, when I say customer discovery is one of your processes and philosophies as a founder, that includes funding as well. Try to talk to everybody that you can as you're on this journey now and moving into a startup to at least get on their radar and start building a pipeline of potential funding sources. And you just have to. It's just one of the requirements when you're a founder to be successful is trying to find all sources of funding. If there's incubators that you could apply to, if there's contests, again, KBS awards, be in all of that, as well as friends and family and people as well as potentially customers might fund you initially.
And just switching slightly gears, there's a question from the audience, and there was also another question that we had related to intellectual property. As Bob and you, Peter, mentioned during your presentations, again, this is a fast-moving space. There's different ways of protecting intellectual property, but by the nature of digital startups, they tend to work in different scenarios and change a lot. So one question is, again, how can you protect once you finally get that minimum viable product, and how do you protect whether it's that code, and second too is, like, again, given the nature of this many times collective interaction, like whether it's hackathon or you're participating in an accelerator program, what are the implications of working with others in the intellectual property of a company here?
Yeah. You go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so no, and I'm sure that Bob will have thoughts from kind of the industry side to share too. I mean, from the university perspective, certainly things that come out of UNC research that involve UNC faculty, grad students working on funded projects. We have a mechanism for managing ownership of intellectual property, right? That's one piece that kind of comes up, and who's contributed and how do we do that? But I think kind of to the broader question, it's a delicate balance, I think, is our view, right? Especially when you have kind of a mix of teams, like here's a student team, or from across campus, different departments, different mix of folks doing these digital sprints or other kind of ideation activities. And so certainly, yeah, you don't want to end up like the Winklevoss twins and Mark Zuckerberg and the social network, right? Like, here's our great idea, and then somebody takes your idea and runs off and is super successful with it. But on the same note, you can't hide it under a bushel, right? You'll have 100% of zero. So I think there's a balance to be struck in terms of, helping, leverage the value of others and participation. But you do have to recognize at a certain point that you do have to get the legal folks or the legal side of things involved. And so I think asking a lot of questions up front and having a plan for how you might deal with that, and then, try to see that applied. But I don't know, Bob, from your perspective on, is it sign everybody up right away with CDAs from the industry side, or what do you think best practice might be?
No, there's so much software and digital solutions out there. Yeah, a big company could potentially say, I can put 3 engineers on this and get that algorithm out there now. But if you're an expert in your field and you see a problem with a workflow that you want to solve, and you put together a digital solution that could do that, you first of all, speed to market and penetrating and selling and getting it in there is going to help protect you. But if these other companies don't have that expertise and say, I could build that algorithm, but I'm not quite sure I know how to solve that problem. I don't know if I know how to sell that or know how to actually provide the value that they say they're going to provide. So I don't see, I mean, we sign CDAs and stuff in industry with technology, but at the end of the day, I don't see a lot of people stealing other people's ideas before they go to market with it, because there's just so many of them. Like it says, it's a different game with digital solutions than it is in other places. Even if they could build the algorithm, if they don't quite know how to target to the market that you want to solve, it's going to be tough for them to beat you to the punch. But speed is critical.
And both talking about speed and, you know, the critical aspects to get that to an exit or to actually to sell the products themselves, you know, maybe we can also use the example of, again, Impulsonic as to, you know, how do you get the company ready for both the minimal viable product as well as, you know, getting it acquired? How did you manage to get involved, interested in this? You know, what sort of milestones do you have to show to them? Or how is it that you manage that?
I think one of the most important thing you can do is just build a good product. Like it not trying to be idealistic or anything here. I think that is one of the things where it was not like there were many other companies using the product. So I think that's the first thing we focused on is like, hey, can you build a really good quality product? And like interacting with customers is probably the best thing you can do, especially early on in terms of solidifying the product, getting feedback. So I think that was one thing we focused really a lot on, to building out a product and make sure we are talking with the few clients in the beginning very much to get like a solidify our product in some sense. In terms of the acquisition itself, I think that's sort of hard to control in some ways. A lot of things have to align for something like that to work out. But one of the most important thing I saw was us having deep conversation with many different clients. So there's always that opportunity you have where your technology is a really good fit in some part of their business. So in our experience, that has been the sort of catalyst of them or somebody else approaching us saying, hey, would you like to join our company? And we would like to acquire our technology, just so that they have seen like what your technology is, they've got a chance to work with it and evaluate it and sort of figure out how it fits in the larger context within their company.
Great. And then Bob, I don't know if you can add anything to that in terms like, again, these young startups, again, developing this minimal viable products and getting the product out there. Obviously, like Anish mentioned, it's super important to get customer feedback, engagement, and you mentioned that during your presentation as well. But what else should these companies be doing? You know, what are like the strategies to go on and fundraise, you know, or you're trying to get acquired? You know?
One of the, I heard there was a serial entrepreneur here that said a statement to me a few years ago that resonated with me for a founder. He says, look, he goes, you need to, as founders, you need to be making positive traction and moving your venture forward. And the way you need to do that is you should be talking to 6 to 12 people every week and make that part of your routine. And it could be potential customers in the segment you're talking to, experts in that area, investors in that area. And it's, he went through strategies on how you do it. He goes, you know, you'd be surprised how you have a 30-minute meeting with someone and you get just great insights as to it's either validating your hypothesis or you now have new things to think about. Or you might have potential, a lot of cases, if you do this diligently, you'll probably have a sales pipeline when you start spinning out, because you'll have probably someone that you're talking to and you're not selling to them. You're just saying, I want to understand if a problem, help me understand your problem a little bit better. I think I might have a solution for it. And usually you'll get people to say, oh, hey, when that comes out, give me a call. Because I think I might be interested in adopting it. And all of a sudden you have your sales pipeline, and you might have a VC investor that might say the same thing, saying, hey, you're a little early right now, but I want to keep tabs with you. And as you do that diligently, as well as you're doing a million other things, if you're getting into the startup game, there's a lot of things you need to be doing. That's one area that I saw has been very effective. And usually at the end of the calls, you could say, who are two people I should talk to? And they would make warm introductions saying, well, you should talk to that guy and that woman. And then all of a sudden it just kind of builds on each other, and it becomes part of who you are as a founder.
I actually couldn't agree more with what Bob just said. Like, talking to lots and lots of people. And one of the experience we had was NSF has this program, iCorp, when we got an SBIR from NSF. And as part of that process, they sort of require you to talk to N number of people. And a lot of people coming from sort of research background, there may be hesitance of going and doing that. And a lot of people have that, oh, I like going and talking to people. That's not something they are comfortable with or have done a lot. So having some sort of systematic reason to know you have to talk to 100 people because that's what the program requires. I think that at least helped me sort of get out of my shell of no, but as soon as you talk to 100 people, you see the value. So I can't stress enough, like what Bob just said, like just talk to people, and it may be hard, but that's something you have to build or develop within yourself.
Thank you. A related question from the audience, again, besides talking to people and getting all that market feedback, we talked about that, you need to get to market quickly. So the question is, what resources do you provide your teammates to help to get these products to market quickly? Again, given that there's the speed and execution do matter with digital solutions, So how do you go about, the resources? What have you given your teams to do this quickly?
That's why when I say the 3 hats that a founder needs, the tech hat is very critical. And I see so many startups where people have big ideas in a market that needs tech, and then they don't really have the team behind it. It takes them a long time to get into market. But that to me is still super critical. And a lot of people, it sounds like Anish came out of computer science. He came out from a tech world, but as I'm talking to people in global health and School of Pharmacy and School of Medicine, you're not inherently tech people. And so finding that partner, initially it might be a vendor you work with, but I think at some point as a company spins out, you would have to have a very good tech partner that is with you along the way, because it's just so critical. And that's one way of getting it out quickly is getting that match as early as possible.
Thank you. And as another, I want to make sure we get to the questions from the audience. So there's another one that is asking for your experience with software that is for research purposes only, and if that avoids initial FDA clearance. Is that a reasonable strategy to get a product in front of patients quicker? So I guess, and this is a case for many of our digital solutions at UNC. They have some sort of relationship to health IT or something, and there's always not an uncommon question that our startups pose: do I go the FDA route or not? So what is your position here? What is your advice?
So I would say most people, if they can, would prefer not to have to deal with regulatory and FDA issues. So clearly that's a consideration, and we do. So for example, we have a case that we're looking to license to a startup that's in the medical imaging space. Clearly there's a potential clinical use down the road, and they expect they will have to get some sort of FDA clearance at some point. But they do have a beachhead strategy where they're going to try to prepare and have software that is related to the medical imaging that they can use with the researchers working in that space. So it is a research use only, but it will allow them to better understand the market, to validate the technology further, to build some advocacy with key thought leaders. So it will have those benefits in addition to, generating some revenue for folks that will pay for access to the software. So I definitely think that staged approach has a lot of merit.
And anybody here again in the panel might have some also comments on getting the team as well. Again, many of the companies are bootstrapping at the beginning, like you mentioned, Bob. So how do you work with the right talent, or how do you find that to get that again, develop software companies moving forward?
Usually, again, you're going to have fractional resources when you get out, and building the team. Again, that is one of the key challenges for a new venture and for founders. I help. I'm one of the reasons I'm here is just because my deep Rolodex of all sorts of tech resources, marketing resources, sales resources. And I help plug, like for one of the startups that we're spinning out right now, I help them get a CEO in place and get that all done to help give them that lift that they need, because they really needed that aspect, because the PIs were not spinning out with the company. They were staying at UNC. And so, yeah, that is part of that resource ramp, and part of, as you're moving down that path from idea to spin out, that's one of the things that has to be solved. Now, on the sales side, I use a model where I have inside and sales reps that work for projects, and they get plugged in and help these companies launch into revenues. But at the point, it's not really outsourced in the way I was talking about earlier. It's very still custom for that particular company. But that's a big challenge, and each startup is going to be unique depending on the makeup of the founding team.
Anish, how did you hire your first talent and employees?
He was also a UNC grad. So I think one of the with startup, like you have less of a luxury of like having an employee and it's not working out. So more interaction or evidence you have, like, okay, they are going to be right fit, that helps from the beginning. So in fact, so one of our first employees was a student that my co-founder taught while he was teaching a course. He was also a grad student, and he knew he was great, and he was looking for a job, and he wanted to join startup, and like we pitched him as well. So definitely looking through people who or know more than like than sort of open job application, that would help for sure. So always be on a lookout for people who might be a good fit for your company, and don't, like, it's fine, just ask them, hey, are you interested? That's okay. And another thing I've found in the process was a lot of learning we have received is from other startups. So we have been in a couple of co-working spaces. We were at Kickstarter Accelerator. So that was Kickstarter Accelerator. That was great. We were down in, name's skipping me. Yeah, we were down in Raleigh at a accelerator space. So we talked to a whole bunch of startup, and a lot of problems we got a lot of help from other companies who were going through the same process. So I think not in terms of like how to get executives, we haven't had to go through that process, but in terms of getting some of the problem solves, other co-founders and other startups, just talking with them about problems we were facing helped a lot. And looking through our network for team members was a good starting point to build up.
Thank you. And I think we're almost out of time. So I want to ask one final question, which is for Peter. So the question is, what tools, approaches do you use most often to help protect and license the know-how for software solutions when you don't have a formal copyright, trademark, or patent?
Yeah, so great question. So, I think we come at it a couple of different ways. So certainly if it's, a UNC startup and the people, right, that have the know-how, that have the art of this down, they have the connections, those leads, that speed to market, those advantages, right, that Bob points out that other companies might not have access to. So if those people are going with the startup, that's, transferring essentially kind of in their heads as it is. But it's a tricky one for us. We like to be very clear and concise on what intellectual property is being transferred, so that we don't get into a situation where there's some disagreement and the company is saying we didn't get everything we were promised, and the university is not in the position where we have to say you don't get, perpetual access to these people's brains forever, for little or no fee. So there's definitely a balance to be struck there. I will say, both copyright and patent, you don't have to go through a formal process initially. You can kind of pursue those common law and mark things right out of the gate. And indeed, where some of the value is this kind of know-how and just kind of the brand, right? So we see this programmatically, in particular, out of places like education, where an assessment or intervention is well known for the name, for whatever it might have been titled, or perhaps the investigator. And one thing we can do is simply trademark the name and license the trademark. And so that kind of captures some of the intangible benefit that might go along with the technology that's not particularly wrapped up in the code per se, but it kind of provides some of that pedigree. So that's one way to capture, this kind of intangible intellectual property. But know-how can be tricky. We certainly do license it. To the extent that people are moving, it makes that easier. But then, we can define best we can, is that documentation? Is that, some customer list? What is the actual kind of know-how? And then we'll figure out what options are available to us in terms of transferring that.
Thank you so much. And again, I think we're right at 2 o'clock now. So again, I want to reiterate to everybody here listening that we have fantastic resources at UNC. Peter and Bob are here. Kickstart, of course. We're also here to help you. And it's great to hear a success story like Impulsonic. We want to motivate other startups at UNC to be just as successful. And seeing how great technology is actually making impact in the actual world. It's fantastic. So I don't know if the panelists, do you want to say one final remarks before officially closing the webinar?
No, thanks a lot, Maria, for having me on. And I echo, there's so many resources that you and IED provides to UNC community here. This is you have a lot of support if you want to spin out.
Yeah, I think that's great too. I think this has been good, and we're trying to do more here. So we'd love to engage with anybody, and tell your friends, and feel free to contact us anytime with any kind of question. And it's just helpful for us to be engaged with as many folks on campus as we can be.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me for the webinar, and make use of the resources you have at the university. And while you're a student, probably one of the best time and sort of low risk time to experiment with starting your own company. So don't miss that opportunity.
Thank you so much again. Thank you everybody for being here, and we'll have a copy of the webinar later for anybody who wants to access it as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.